much for inviting me. It's really an honor to be here. I'm so impressed by this organization. But what stands out to me most about Ohio Citizen Action is that for the past 50 years, it has been up against enormous obstacles in fighting for Ohio's working people, against the usual suspects: corporate power, neoliberal ideology, toxic polluters and climate deniers, and of course, corrupt politicians. This wasn't, FDR's 30s and 40s, it wasn't even the long 60s. But Sandy and Rachel have had to deal with the darkest of these past 50 years. But they and the organization have always been steadfast, smart, innovative, and able to come through with some very important victories about which they'll talk next. As for my experience, I came to Ohio toward the end of the Vietnam War. I had met Jay Westbrook in Dayton through the Indochina Peace Campaign and the work that we did together, and Ed Kelly, who I did similar work with in Boston when we both lived there. Eventually, some other people from the Indochina Peace Campaign were persuaded to come, including Brewster Rhoads, who's here, as you know, Paul Ryder, who didn't make it, and Jack Nicholl. So we believed that the next crisis facing the country was the destruction of the industrial working class, and that Ohio was at the very center of all of this, as plants in Ohio, really throughout the industrial Midwest, were closing and moving abroad, what we now call corporate-run globalization, and also automated. So I learned two difficult lessons almost immediately. One is that democratic political leaders, with some notable exceptions, including someone who's here tonight, were abandoning workers and embracing their newfound neoliberal ideology as rationalizations. And secondly, we were fighting economic forces that were much, much stronger than we were. The notable exceptions, of course, were Senator Mike Schwarzwalder, who was just passed, and of course, some of his House and Senate colleagues in the state legislature, but also Senator Howard Metzenbaum, of course, and then, above all, and for decades and into the future, Senator Sherrod Brown. Stories that brought it home to me, just what we were up against when we started out. One is I met Nick Costanderas, who also recently passed, who was president of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Local Electric, closing Glidden paint plant on the west side of Cleveland just after we opened the first office in Cleveland in 1976. He was a very smart, energetic, and determined union leader who rallied his local and asked for help. So he and I made the rounds of various office holders, but no help was forthcoming. Not even a peep from city council members. What can we do? It's business. Or the state legislators who lectured us on being sure not to make Ohio C1 friendly to business. And then the Greater Cleveland Growth Association. You guys, you don't get it. You're out of it. We have a service sector that will pick up your people. You don't have to worry, just get the hell out of the way. So then I met Frank Charnella, a union member at Republic Rubber in Youngstown, just as the company announced its plans to close. He was sure there was a way that he, his union members, and a small group of managers could put together an operation to take it over as a cooperative. And I remember how excited I was when we reopened the plant and invited me to see it running and to be greeted on the shop floor by Frank and all the union members we had been working with to help keep it, to make it happen, basically. But it wasn't to be for very long. Over a decade later, it closed, 1989. And if you Google it, you'll read a well-known landmark for ruin. The Republic Rubber Company was located in Youngstown, Ohio. And we saw early on in a study we did, led by Stuart Greenberg, which we got from the National Institute of Mental Health, that some of the bitter consequences in the lives of those who had lost their jobs. Long-term unemployment, but surrender to alcohol, heroin, and suicide. What Nobel Prize-winning economist Angus Deaton and his partner Anne Case years later called deaths of despair. Now, our plant closing bill, really what we would now call a just transition bill, didn't go down without a fight. Because over 2,000 union workers and community activists bust into Columbus for Ohio Senate hearings on the bill, with a local news helicopter buzzing overhead and filming everything. And as the steel workers and auto workers and rubber workers and others were marching up the hill to the Capitol building from the parking lot to testify and show support. And some of them were so angry at Senate Majority Leader, the Democrat Oliver O'Kasich, for refusing to move the bill, that they chased him down the hall. He narrowly escaped and got into his office and locked the door and locked him out. But we never gave up that fighting spirit, and we won some things that have had lasting beneficial outcomes. We played a big role in rescuing the mini light plant in Cleveland, now Cleveland Public Power, from and preventing its takeover by the misnamed illuminating company, infamously corrupt First Energy Corporation. So we won the state's first right to know law, toxic right to know law, which then became a state law a number of years later under Dick Celeste. And in the process, we engaged in an electoral battle that elevated Tom Rush, its sponsor, to a higher position than he ever achieved in his previous runs. And it probably gave Roxanne Pauls the evidence she needed to eventually run for mayor successfully. Sandy and Rachel will talk. But in politics, we, of course, helped Senator Howard Metzenbaum win his re-election campaign against George Boyden, which you remember had never lost a race to anyone except to Metzenbaum. We helped Jay Westbrook begin his career, which involved his becoming president. We helped Roxanne Pauls in her races successfully for mayor of Cincinnati. We helped June Lucas win her 2 House races from Trumbull County, and Mark Henry, the city commission of Dayton. We even helped Marcy Kaplan in her first run in 1982 for the U.S. Congress. Yeah. And of course, we played a significant role in both of Dick Celeste's races for governor. And I must say, we helped Dennis Kucinich win his mayoral race, which was to, among other things, and importantly, to rescue Mini Light. And to help him do all of this, we built the largest canvas in the country. Karen Bachner is here, now Karen Guzner, who had the foresight to marry our first organizer in the Cincinnati office, Meryl Guzner, who is also here. And so we built canvases that, and phone canvases, door-to-door and phone, with 2 separate teams, one that focused on economic issues and one focused on just toxic issues. And we deployed them, of course, in election campaigns. Now, finally, and this is relevant to the work that, particularly, that Ohio Citizen Action has done intensively over the years, to fight corruption, and in one of the coolest but least remembered pieces of muckraking research, Laura Yeomans of our staff and her husband, Richard Brenner, exposed in very, very well-documented work just how Ohio House Speaker, Democrat Vern Reif, operated with timely corporate money, either to block good bills or to pass hideous legislation for his 19-year run. Now, that was done and recognized by the Akron Beacon Journal that wrote a 3-part series on it, crediting Laura and Richard over and over again. And we learned later that it was instrumental in killing Reif's plans to run for governor. So on that note, let me turn it over to Sandy Buchanan.